Good evening. Welcome to the third season of the Pacific Division Feeding Capacity Building Series. This series is brought to you by the Pacific Division Feeding Leadership. We'll be using the same Teams link for each session, so please double check your time zone before joining, especially given that we're now in daylight saving time. And I understand some of you might need to leave early because we have multiple meetings going on during this nighttime. My name is Yi Wei. I've been a volunteer with the Red Cross for 16 years. I'm a Master Chief and the Pacific Division Feeding Co-Lead along with Mary. So several housekeeping items. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted tonight on our Pacific Division Red Cross YouTube channel. The link was included in the reminder email that was sent out earlier. The slides were also there. In case you're not able to see the live version of the slides, you can go ahead, click the link in the reminder email, and you can follow the slides along. Your camera and mic have been disabled. Please enter your questions in the Q&A and we'll answer them when time allows. The Q&A button is to the right of the chat. The chat scrolls too fast, so we won't be able to catch the questions. That's the reason we're asking you to put into the Q&A. And please remember to enter your own hours on volunteer connection. So food safety ranked very high in the survey. So today, Mary, Michael, and Sandy will share with us what's beyond the menu. So Mary, please take it away.
Thank you, Iwei. And I'm not doing much presenting tonight, but one of the things I wanted to bring to everyone's attention is we talked a lot about the courses that were available on EDGE, the information that's available on OneSource, and we know you all have access to that. One of the goals of this series is to kind of help bring some of the tricks and tips that happen on a DR. So I'm really pleased to have as presenter tonight Michael Hernandez, who is a feeding lead in Gold Country region. He has a lot of experience in food safety. He was actually a state food inspector before he retired and joined us at the Red Cross. And also presenting with him is Sandy Dighton, who is a mass care chief from the Alaska region and very proficient in the feeding area. They're going to share a lot of information for you, but I just want everyone to know that if you've been on one DR, you've been on one DR, and everyone is different. So while we give you tips and tricks, I always want you to refer back to OneSource and your task sheets. And certainly if you have any questions ever, please reach out to Iwei or myself, and we're happy to answer those questions at a future date if they don't come up tonight. With that being said, Michael, will you take it away?
Good afternoon. Thank you all for participating in this week's Food Capacity Series. This week, we are going to be talking about food safety and menu considerations. And the way I like to think of it is, when I or you have hosted a meal, we do our best to have an enjoyable meal. We want it to be tasty and nutritional and safe. But since we're working with the public as Red Cross volunteers, we are held to a much higher standard of care. So that needs to be foremost in your minds, that what we do in our own personal kitchens may not directly translate into a feeding operation. So today, we are going to be talking in two particular areas. One is food safety, and this is of paramount importance because when we're dealing with our clients, which is the general population, many of them have underlying health conditions which really put them at risk for anything that we might do that can cause a foodborne illness. Moreover, if you think about a shelter, those of you who have been in a shelter, those people are there out of necessity. And there's a great deal of stress and anxiety about their futures, about their homes, their families, their jobs. All of that does have an effect on their immune system. So under normal circumstances, we might be able to fight off a particular event, contaminant. But when you're under stress, you're at much higher risk to our immune system. So we need to keep that in mind. Even healthy individuals can be susceptible to even low levels of contamination due to food safety failures. So that's why we have to keep food safety really at the topmost priority in our. And we have really been fortunate in the Red Cross. To my knowledge, I only know of one incident in which there has been a foodborne outbreak associated with our shelters. And as a matter of fact, one of the members presenting was actually present at that one. And I don't know if she wants to talk more about it later, but I think we do a pretty good job, and that's because Red Cross has pretty high standards. So the second thing we're going to be talking about is inclusive meal delivery. And our primary goal is to provide food for survival, certainly, but we must, to the best of our ability, meet their people's specific nutritional needs. And in summary, the Red Cross feeding standard says that they have been developed to ensure services that meet client needs for nutrition, safety, and cultural appropriateness. So those are going to be our guiding principles. It's going to be a lot of information here. There's much, much more detail on OneSource. There are many, many documents on OneSource, and I certainly encourage you to take a look at those. Next slide. Ooh, really? Okay. So if you have a feeding gap, you should have taken these two courses, Feeding Fundamentals and Basic Food Safety. And obviously, these are very detailed food safety trainings. I'm really impressed at the level of complexity to these things. They're very, very complete. So you've already done that. But if you're like me, unfortunately, I've taken lots of training with Red Cross. You know, you go through those online courses, and it's a lot of information, and you can't remember it all. So you're going to need things like this, and you're going to need to review things, and certainly your supervisor is going to make sure that you're in compliance with the food safety standards. So just keep in mind, there's just a lot of stuff to remember. If you're not a feeding gapper, we still recommend that you take these courses. As you know, I know of stories where people have gone in for a logistics assignment and they ended up being a feeding person or something else. Stuff happens, you know, you can be reassigned to something. So it always is something that you need to be prepared for, especially if you're a shelter volunteer. You can be called in to help the feeding staff at any time. Next slide. So I call this the rules of the game. The Red Cross standards for food safety and food handling is recognized by all public health agencies throughout the county, and they are the most up-to-date and complete safety rules. This one happens to be in my hometown. Sacramento County has a pamphlet, and many of the counties do have pamphlets that are similar to this, that you'll see it mirrors Red Cross's almost identically. A lot of the things don't apply to us because this is for retail food, and those are for restaurants and grocery stores, and we don't do some of the same things. We don't cook. So some of the things will not apply to us. But if you're interested in what a county health person would look for, there's an inspection self-inspection checklist here. And believe me, they will come. We're under the jurisdiction of the local health departments or possibly some other public health agencies, and they will come in and do an inspections. I've been inspected twice when I was a supervisor in a disaster kitchen, so I know that they do come in, and so you need to be prepared for what it is they're going to be looking for. If you follow the general outlines that we're going to be giving you here, you're going to be pretty well settled as far as that's concerned. I would recommend it if you would like to go to that. Next slide, please. So these are the 6 major causes of foodborne illness as identified by the FDA and CDC. Not all of them apply to us. We don't do cooking, we don't do thawing, we don't do reheating typically. So we wouldn't have to worry about that. In the case of food from unsafe sources, we generally don't have to worry about that because we're required to get foods from places that are licensed and inspected by a health department. So that doesn't always come into play. However, there are times that people are going to come in because they want to help and they want to donate food. And so there is a process by which those people are vetted through some means, usually the food manager, and they have to go through that. We would not normally accept food at the site from anybody who comes up and says, hey, I run a restaurant and I have some food and I'd like to donate it. That's just not done. There have been instances when were culturally appropriate foods that were being offered. Again, that was reviewed and approved by a food safety manager, and that was given approval to serve in that particular instance. So that's something that you need to do. We're going to go over poor personal hygiene, cross-contamination and cross-contact, and time temperature in more detail in the following slide. Next slide. It's important to note that if you suspect or there has been confirmed a food-related illness, it needs to be reported immediately. Now that surmises that you know what the symptoms of a food poisoning, foodborne illness, or an allergic reaction, or a food intolerance reaction, or gastrointestinal illness is. And I'm not I used to be a public health official, but I'm not now. And a lot of people working in the kitchen may not know that. But if it's suspected, if someone complains, I've got a stomach ache, or, someone going to the restroom a lot, first thing you need to do is consult with disaster health services if they're on site. And if not, then you need to find someone in the DHS fairly quickly. And that way it can be reviewed and evaluated properly, because we have to get on these things really quickly. Certain foodborne illnesses, if it's a bacterial infection, it's one thing. If it's a viral infection, it can spread very, very quickly through a shelter. So it needs to be got on very quickly. So my advice to you is any kind of complaint that you might hear related to someone, say, hey, I think it's something I ate, you need to get on it very, very quickly. Next slide. And I think this is Sandy's.
Yep, it is. All right, welcome everyone. We're going to talk about personal hygiene. So the first category here is wellness and injury. Obviously, we don't want to be serving food or have anything to do with food if we are sick in any way. So it's just not done. As far as injuries go, if it's just a minor thing that, say, you can cover up with a Band-Aid on your hand and then put a pair of gloves over it, you're probably okay to go there. But otherwise, if you've got a more major injury that might not keep you from working, but it should keep you out of the food service area, you could possibly be directed or reassigned to a different area. So just go to your supervisor and talk to your supervisor about that. As far as hand washing and sanitizing, you've got to remember that hand washing has to take 20 seconds. If you need to sing yourself a little song, you can sing Happy Birthday or Mary Had a Little Lamb for that 20 seconds, because you have to remember to remove the soil. You have to get your hands clean before you sanitize them. Sanitizing your hands doesn't clean them. That's kind of a misnomer that people are confused about. As far as gloves, though, Michael, having been a food inspector, likes to say that a pair of gloves only serves to keep your own hands clean. doesn't help to keep other people's food clean. You have to remember with gloves, they need to be replaced frequently. That's one thing about the Red Cross. We have plenty of gloves. Don't worry about going through too many of the disposable gloves. Red Cross has warehouses full of gloves. So if you haven't done anything else needing to replace them, you need to remember to replace them at least every 4 hours, but do change them often. If you go and do something like scratch your nose or scratch your forehead, you need to change your gloves. If you pick something up off of a table somewhere, you've got to change your gloves. So just get in the practice of changing them frequently and you should be okay. For outer garments, you're going to want to follow the Red Cross guidelines. Obviously, no open-toed shoes or sandals in food service areas or on an herb or in a kitchen, period. So you're going to want to wear some sort of a vest. Now, there's a difference of opinion in which vests are appropriate when serving food. But if in doubt, the Red Cross has disposable aprons that should be included in your kitchen kit, and those can be worn over the top of your own clothes, and that will solve the debate as to which vests, whether it's your disaster relief vest or one of the canvas or a cotton vest like this gentleman in the photo has on. So that's pretty much it for outer garments. For personal items, you're going to want to store them elsewhere. Preferably don't bring them into the food service line or the kitchen. Leave them behind if possible. Otherwise, find somewhere else to store them. Hair coverings are very important. They must be worn when serving food, whether you're working out of the back of an herb or if you're in a food service line in a shelter. You can use a hairnet, which the Red Cross does have oodles of in our kitchen kits and in our warehouses. So you can use the hairnet. You can wear a ball cap. You can wear a bandana. The newest thing that people seem to like to wear are the bouffants, which are almost like a chef's hat or like a surgical cap or a scrub cap. So you just want to be sure that you have your hair covered. Jewelry, we want to keep jewelry to a minimum. If you've got big dangly earrings that could drag through something, or a necklace, if you bend over, could drag through the food, or you could lose one of these items in the food, heaven forbid. So also another thing to think about is if you've got rings on your fingers, they can possibly rip the gloves that you have on, and you wind up changing your gloves constantly. Lotions and creams, leave them off if they're smelly. Our clients don't want to have to smell your cologne over the smells of their delicious food that they're fixing to be served. So no smelly lotions and creams. And then smoking and eating is just not done. It's forbidden on a food line. It shouldn't happen whether you're working out of the back of an herb or if you're serving in a shelter or dishing people up at the community center. No, don't eat there in the line in front of our clients, and definitely no smoking. That's taken care of outside, and that covers that one. Next slide, please, Iwe. And this is a great one here to think of and to we could share if anyone's interested in it. This is telling folks to wash their hands, and it says it's 24 languages, but I counted actually 25 because I think they forgot to include English as one of them. So 25 languages, and I went through all of them and looked at them. And here in Alaska, I believe we would probably use at least 7 of those different languages at any point in time. And next slide, please, Iwe. And back to you, Michael.
Thank you, Sandy. So this one talks about cross-contamination and cross-contact control. And this can be somewhat confusing, but I want to try and explain it to you. Both of them are contaminations of either food or food contact surfaces. And that's a distinction that I want to make sure everybody understands. We're not only talking about contaminating food, but a food contact surface can also transfer contamination. So those things are used, food and food contact surfaces are used really jointly. So cross-contamination is actually the transfer of filth, bacteria, viruses, or chemicals onto food or food contact surfaces. And cross-contact is specifically the transfer of allergens. Public health officials make that distinction. Technically, an allergen is a chemical, but they brought it out separately because of the risk associated with allergens. So for that reason, food contact surfaces and should be cleaned and sanitized very, very frequently. And we'll go over how to go about that properly. But it's important that all those areas be cleaned and sanitized whenever there's individuals before feeding, after feeding, and if there's any spills or any other kinds of things going on during feeding, it may also need to be cleaned and sanitized. We also have to think about contact between raw and uncooked foods, because that can spread contamination and allergens depending on what the food is. So food should be, care should be taken during storage. They should not be stored together because you could transfer contaminants to that. And obviously when serving, how many people use the same spoon for serving, same utensil, I should say, for serving one food and then the other because you didn't have another one. Those things can cause problems. So you need to be concerned about how you use those things. Another thing that I see often, if you go onto the Red Cross website and you look at photos of disaster feeding, I notice one thing that is frequently, I think, an issue is the food is really close to the individuals when they're serving. They're able to look over. If you can think about a buffet line at a restaurant, they have what's called a sneeze guard. You know, there's a barrier between them and the food. We don't have sneeze guards. So we have to have a little bit of space between the clients and the food because, you know, I've been in feeding operations where they actually take their hand and want to grab something, and I have my tongs ready to serve them, but they want to just pick it out. So those are things that you need to keep track of. And obviously, if you have food that has a cover on it, a lot of things come in aluminum trays with a cover. If you leave it exposed too often, you know, that again, people are coming through the serving line, and oftentimes, you know, they're just too close to it. So make sure that the food is protected as much as possible. So if you have prepackaged food, you know, obviously the risk of contamination is much less. It's already there. You can hand it to a person, and once they open it, then they can expose it whatever they wish to after they get it to their own table. But most of the food, a lot of the food that we serve is exposed, or a lot of times actually they're in clamshells, which is also considered non-exposed, and we can just handle the whole food meal to them, and that really helps keep possible contamination down. With respect to personal action and activity, we talked about many of those things under the personal hygiene, you know, the gloves, the hairnet. You know, if you're sneezing, if you leave food unattended, and we're also going to talk about, you know, temperature control a little bit later. All those personal things that we do consciously and unconsciously can have an effect on the safety of the food. So we need to be aware of that. In my kitchens, I tell everybody we're all gatekeepers. I'm the supervisor, and I'm watching for any food safety violations. You know, but even you know, sometimes I'll be talking and I'll touch my glove to my pants or to my apron or something, and you know, someone will tell me, "Hey, Mike, you got to change your glove," and you know, we look out for each other. So there's a lot of unconscious things that we do that we're just not aware of. So we got to be aware, and hopefully others can help us out with that. Sandy talked about gloved hands contamination. Again, I've seen many operations where people are just touching everything. They think they're wearing gloves and they have a false sense of security. So we always have to be mindful about when we're in gloved hands, and especially when we're serving food, that we keep them in a sanitary condition, if not just change them, right? And finally, equipments and utensils. When you're serving, what do you do with that spoon or that tong or whatever? Do you set it down on the counter? Do you set it on top of the food container? All those things, whether it be a food contact surface, a non-food contact surface, can be a source of contamination or cross contact. So we have to be mindful to preserve the sanitizing nature of all the utensils, and we need to keep them protected during serving. Next slide. Cleaning and sanitizing. Okay, so this is really an important slide. Many of the places we go to do have cleaning and sanitizing chemicals. A lot of times you're going to be given soap and some bleach, and so you're going to need to know what to do with it. And at the bottom, if you happen to have bleach, that's the formula. It's 1 tablespoon, which happens to be 1 capful, actually. They manufactured it that way, to 1 gallon of water. So you're going to need a way to measure 1 gallon, but that'll give you the proper sanitizing concentration. I put that 5.25 sodium hypochlorite only because that's the standard chlorine content in most commercial bleaches, but not all bleaches are created the same. If you're buying the national brands, you should be at that level. Even if you're at 4%, if you're at 1 tablespoon to a gallon, you're pretty close to the proper sanitizing concentration. So you're just going to have to mix it. So let's talk about non-food contact surfaces. Those would be tables. Those will be counters. You may need to clean and sanitize chairs. Any of those kinds of surface that could possibly spread this. Remember, people are touching those things all the time, and you don't know if they've washed their hands. You don't know what their health conditions are. All of those things need to be cleaned and sanitized. So when it comes to the non-food contact surfaces, you need to do soap and water, and then you follow it with a sanitizing solution or spray. There are commercial sanitizing solutions, or if you have your bleach solution with a disposable cleaning cloth, then you can use that. For the food contact surfaces, and those would be any kinds of utensils you might have. Maybe you'll have a stainless steel container that you'll have to return to a restaurant. You're gonna have to clean it. Certainly cambrels. We're going to be talking about something called a cambrel. Then you're going to need to do a proper cleaning and sanitizing. And that means first you're going to have to do a rinsing with potable water to get all of the food particles out. Then you're going to have to wash it in a soapy solution. From there, you're going to rinse it, and then you're going to have to expose it to a sanitizing solution. And that would be for approximately 30 seconds to a minute. So most things will fit in a standard 3-compartment sink. Not all facilities will have a 3-compartment sink, and that's intended for the wash, the rinse, and the sanitize. For the cambrels, which are much larger, you may have to have a much larger container for the sanitizing, washing, and rinsing. And in the field, you're going to have to do your best to try and find those things. So that is the standard cleaning for non-food contact surfaces and food contact surfaces. Next slide. So sometimes food is going to come in bulk in a thing called a Cambro. A Cambro is just an insulated container. They're typically red. They have very thick walls. Cambro is a commercially available trademark name for these things. They're much like your ice chest that you use when you go on a picnic, except for they're much higher quality. And they do hold cold foods cold, and hot foods hold for a long, long time. So if you're doing an emergency response vehicle or an ERV feeding, or if you receive food in bulk in a Cambro, then you're going to have to make sure that that Cambro is properly cleaned and sanitized, and certainly before and after. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but I will just summarize it for you. First, you're going to need to rinse it. You're going to have to put it in a washing solution and then rinse it with hot water, and then expose it to the chemical sanitizing solution I said for 30 seconds. And then you wash and rinse and sanitize the Cambro lids and seals. And then you sanitize all of the sanitary surfaces. The thing that's missing, this is directly out of the food safety standard documents, is it needs to be in a sanitary place where it can air dry. So that's something that you're going to need to have enough space to do that. Fortunately, most Cambros, if you're going to be using them, are going to have a food safe liner, plastic liner. So that helps with the cleaning and sanitizing, because you're not going to have a whole lot of residual food particles in it. But it still needs to go through this same cleaning and sanitizing protocol after every use. Next slide. Okay, the famous rule of 4. For those of you who are food gappers, you know the rule of 4. Unfortunately, the standard was changed nationally, so it doesn't quite, the alliteration doesn't quite fit. It used to say 40 to 140 for 4 hours or forget it. The standard has been changed to 41 and 135 degrees for 4 hours or forget it. I don't know if they're going to come up with a nice little thing that you can remember. I really liked it because it was easy to remember it. At any rate, one of the things that it implied, what is one of the things that it implies? If you have this temperature standard, what does it mean for you out there if you are in a kitchen? You can just put it in the chat. I think at minimum, it means you have to take temperatures. And I have heard many stories from people on DRs, disasters, that have said they never saw a thermometer. They never saw anybody take a temperature. And that's just unfortunate, because it's really important for temperature control to take those temperatures. And so I think that most importantly, you need to know that temperature control is probably one of the single most important things that you could do as far as food safety. Now, it's kind of hard to, if you're not a food safety professional, to kind of understand what that whole thing means. Next slide. So this is a graphic here that shows that if food is kept below 41 degrees, that it's considered safe, and the growth of foodborne pathogens is kept to a minimum. It's the same on the upper level. If it's greater than 135 degrees, again, most of the foodborne bacteria and contaminants are kept at a very either killed and or are so slow growing that they don't become a problem. It's between that 41 and 135 when bacteria rapidly grow. And what I like to do is use the example of those of you who bake and yeast. when I'm making my breads, once I activate the yeast, if I were to pour cold water on that yeast, not a whole lot would happen to it. But if I put it in warm water at around 95 degrees, what happens? You can see it bubbling and growing. It is growing very rapidly, and obviously, when you put it in the dough, it rises, and that's the growth of the yeast and the forming of the carbon dioxide that causes the bread to rise. So that's kind of a visual for you of how rapidly some bacteria can grow between 41 and 135. Next slide. Okay, this is a label that the Southern Baptists use. We often use the Southern Baptists as well as Salvation Army and World Central Kitchen. We use lots of suppliers. This is their label that they put on the Cambros. You don't have to use this. This is downloadable on OneSource, but you need to have some kind of system to record temperatures. And again, you have to have take temperatures, and you have to have a thermometer to take temperatures. So you can't do it like with baby formula. Remember when you had your kids, you put it on your you put the milk on your wrist to make sure it isn't too hot. That won't work in this case. So when the food is picked up, there should be a temperature taken, so you know what your baseline is. And then when it arrives, because there may be some delays in getting to you, and certainly when the food is made, if you're making 100 or 200 meals, there's a lag time between the first one and the last one. So that first one is probably cooled off a bit. We don't know how much, depends, but it certainly probably has. And you have to have a way of knowing that. And so once it's received, you take a temperature, and as long as it's if it's a cold food, as long as it's below 41, if it's a hot food, as long as it's above 135, you don't have to worry about it. But once it hits those markers, then your clock starts. And so you need to periodically take temperatures throughout the serving. And if something is closed, like in a Cambro, which is a sealed container, but you have to open it to serve, or even if it's in a clamshell, clamshell has some insulating properties, it's going to cool off over time. So you're going to need to take temperatures fairly frequently just to ascertain when you hit those temperature markers. And the more you expose a food, whether it be cold or hot, the quicker it's going to get to those temperature markers. So you have to have somebody doing that periodically. Next slide. Okay, when we're talking about meal standards, aside from safety and cultural, what exactly are we serving out there? And these are in OneSource. These are directly under the meal standards. And we have a minimum standard, we have an ideal standard. For breakfast, it says a fruit cup or whole fruit, individually packaged granola bar, or it could be a muffin or bagel. Notice it says individually packaged. And that sometimes can be an issue. So hopefully you can get that. Individually packaged serving of juice. If you're using whole fruit, I know that there was a determination made that we weren't going to be selling any fruit that did not have a peelable peel on it. So confined it largely to bananas and oranges and tangerines, where the actual fruit inside was protected. I believe that still holds true. We shouldn't, probably aren't going to be serving apples or peaches or something like that. And we really get into a gray area if we as volunteers decide to wash it and to wrap it, because that gets into food preparation, and it's best that we handle things that are more convenient for us as well as for our clients. So that's the minimum. for the ideal, a hot breakfast would be great if you can, with eggs and pancakes and waffles. There are breakfast sandwiches. They're not the most healthy, but they do have eggs and a protein. There are pancakes out there and a fruit, and then fruit juice or water. Or you can do cold cereal with milk. There's hot cereal such as oatmeal, hot meal that you can use with hot water. It doesn't need milk. And again, a granola bar, a muffin, and possibly a fruit juice. And we do the best we can with this. And frankly, it just depends on where you are and what food services available, especially in the first 48 to 72 hours when some of our partners haven't come in. And typically they don't provide breakfast for us, but some do. So we're at the mercy of what we can find at the local grocery stores and or restaurants. It's the same for lunch and dinner. The minimal standard, if we have a shelf stable meal, I know there are some military type meals that we have in some warehouses, or things that don't require heating or any kind of preparation, such as tuna kits or chicken salad kits. Those are available also. Again, not great meals, but you know what? It's food. We're providing them something that's nutritious, and to the best of our ability, we're going to give them life-sustaining meals. Obviously, the ideal standard would be an 8-ounce entree. There's a lot of discussion about that because an 8-ounce entree may have very little protein in it. Hopefully, you can find an 8-ounce entree that has like a chicken fillet, a turkey, a sliced turkey, roast beef, something like that has a substantial amount of protein in it. 6-ounce vegetable, 6 ounces of fruit, a side snack such as chips or bread, and any condiments. That's always a tough one. And then a 16-ounce beverage and or water. So those would be the standard meals. Again, we do the best that we can. We're giving life-sustaining nutrition and food, and that's our primary objectives. But if we can go over and above that, we should try to the best of our ability. Next slide. Okay, I want to read the top thing if you can't see it. It says, meals must meet cultural, religious, and special dietary needs of people affected by the disaster. Dietary accommodation must be available within 24 hours of request. And that's our standard that we must meet. So what are types of things that we talking about? Cultural or religious preferences. Okay. Well, obviously the three main ones that we can think of as far as that's concerned is certainly kosher food for those of the Jewish faith. And kosher means not only the type of food, but it's strict dietary standards to how it's produced and processed and prepared. And so some places, I go online and try and find kosher and halal foods in case I might need them. And they say that they're kosher and halal, but they may have certain foods that are kosher and halal, but other foods that are not. So to the best of our ability, I'm not Muslim and I'm not Jewish. So my knowledge of this is somewhat limited, but I do, to the best of my ability, when I'm ordering food, try to find out as much as I can about those two things. If we're talking about kosher foods, they can obviously have meat and fowl, including, stuff from cows, sheep, and goats, and geese, and chicken, and dairy, and fish, and eggs, and plant-based foods. So anything in those realms are going to be okay. They do avoid at all costs pork. So that's something that you need to know if you happen to have, for whatever reasons, Chinese food with pork in it, then that ain't going to work for them. Same with Muslims. They have a very strict requirements as far as their halal food. Again, as far as how is it produced, how it's stored. Even the utensils that are used have to be done under the proper conditions. So all of those things come into play when you're dealing with that. Again, they avoid pork, but they can have beef and seafood and milk and cheese and eggs. When it comes to certain other religions, oftentimes vegetarian meals will meet their requirements. We try to account for vegetarian meals, at least 15% vegetarian. If we go to Skya, which is the information that is posted when people come in, and we happen to know that there are 5 vegetarians there, then certainly that helps us. But we always need to account for that to the extent possible. Which brings me to Skya, and it's shelter client something. I don't know.
Information.
I always get that acronym messed up.
Michael, we're really close to our Q&A
okay.
time.
Okay. That tells you all the people who have dietary restrictions and or allergies and or other kinds of meal situations. So that's available to supervisors and above. And in the old days, DHS was a source, but that isn't always someone on site, so we may not have that as possible. So we do need to meet dietary accommodations within 20 hours of request. And we have to deal with special dietary needs such as allergies, diabetes, soft foods, people who have access and functional needs, especially like it's a soft food. If somebody needs to be fed, it's not the shelter volunteers' responsibility to feed them. They typically have a caretaker that will do it, but we just need to make accommodations for them. Infant formula and baby foods must be available. Age-appropriate meals and snacks for kids also need to be available. So all of those things. Real quickly, menus and vendors. If you're buying from a local restaurant, you're not going to know their recipe. You got to ask them to the best of your ability. Are there any food allergens or any other things in there that could possibly be a problem? Next slide. And these are the allergens, 9 allergens that have been identified by CDC and FDA. People who have these allergies can have severe reactions. I know people who have severe reactions to shellfish in particular, shrimp and crab and various other things. Peanuts and nuts is of particular concern because they can be very fatal. And there's a real quick story. These cupcakes were provided to a city day camp, and the child and the parents identified that she had a peanut allergy. What they didn't know is the bakery they got the cupcakes from. They put a little bit of peanut butter in the chocolate frosting and the chocolate cupcakes, and unfortunately the girl died from the exposure. So it's really a serious issue. Next slide. Okay, now we're ready for questions and answers.
Thank you so much. So before we go to questions and answers, another reminder, please put your questions into the Q&A, into the general Q&A, not to comment on someone else because we're going to miss it if you're commenting on someone else. A public service announcement from Mariana is that National Mass Care webinar is happening next Thursday at 11 o'clock Pacific time, and the discussion will be regional feeding plans, among other things. So please join. You can search Mass Care webinar on OneSource to get the link. So there was a comment, was actually a question there that when a shelter is open and it's not a huge shelter, at what point does the supervisor reach out for meals or food for the clients? And if there's no designated driver for breakfast, how can breakfast be delivered? And who do they contact if it is not their own supervisor?
Anyway, I missed the first part of that question. I'm sorry. Could you say it one more time?
The first part is when a shelter is opened and it's not a huge shelter, at what point does the supervisor reach out for meals?
Okay, if I understand the question, I'm going to take a stab at it because I'm not sure I understand the question. Um, the supervisor, the shelter supervisor, if it's a small operation and there's no feeding manager or feeding supervisor, it does fall to the shelter supervisor to make sure that there's food for the clients. Um, in any case, if there is a food supervisor, a feeding supervisor on the job, no matter what the size is they would be the person that would be arranging for either cold breakfast items or, as Mike indicated, a hot breakfast if that's appropriate, as well as lunches and dinners. Does that answer the question?
So, Mary, help me understand. Am I hearing that the shelter supervisor is going to get the food and order the food, not the HQ person? The
Well,
feeding manager at the HQ person? I'm a little lost.
well, and it's I don't understand that it's a small operation. I don't know what that means. Does that mean there's no one at HQ? It's a level 2 being handled by the territory, and there's no feeding person at HQ, which happens often. Who was the question from? Would you come off mute and ask your question?
Okay, Mary, I'll take this question. So what they meant is when you have a small disaster and you do have a fewer clients that is unpredictable, that you don't know how many clients you're going to get. So the best way is when you have clients. So ultimately, whether it's a local disaster, whether it's a territory, whether it's a level 2, level 3, level 7, your HQ feeding team is responsible for the feeding of the shelter. And when you don't have a feeding supervisor or feeding manager at the HQ, which happens, then it falls to the master chief at an operation. And if you don't have a master chief in an operation, which can also happen in a level 2 disaster, that falls under ADF operations, assistant director of operations. So the bottom line is when you need food, you'll be pushed up the chain of command and they will be the one that ordering the food for you. However, you'll be telling them how many you need.
And don't be surprised if once you push it up the chain of command, if it gets pushed back down the chain of command.
Okay, and then the follow-up, not follow-up, the latter half of the question is who do they contact if it is not their own supervisor? So each person will have a supervisor, and if they don't have a direct supervisor, that will be the skip level supervisor. The same thing as in when we say when a shelter supervisor does not have a HQ sheltering manager, then they will be reporting to the master chief, or then they will be reporting to the assistant director of operations. So whomever that is in their direct chain. Okay, so there are multiple questions in the comment instead of the question. So another reminder, putting to the actual question, not to make comment on someone else's comment. How do we measure temperatures for packaged items or individually packaged foods?
Well, unfortunately, you're going to have to sacrifice one of them using that thermometer. One is going to be taken with that intent if it's prepackaged. Most prepackaged foods, if you're considering a clamshell of packaged food, it can be easily opened and the temperature taken. But other types of foods may not need refrigeration if it's prepackaged or heating.
Okay, next question is how does the outside temperature affect the 4 hours window, if it's in the 90-degree heat or whether it's frozen outside?
Exactly. And the environmental conditions are really going to have an effect. Just as I mentioned to you, opening and closing a particular bulk thing, those are all, and that's why you need to take multiple and frequent temperatures. If it's really cold outside, I assume the shelter's not as cold as it is outside. It's going to be at normal room temperatures. So that's going to be fairly standard. But during transport, if it's cold outside, it's going to cool that hot food off. And if it's hot outside, it's going to warm up the colder foods. So that's the reason why you take it at receipt, at pickup and receipt, so that you know where you stand with those temperature parameters.
Thank you. We have 5 minutes left. How do we address peanut allergies?
Don't have peanuts in a shelter. That would be the easiest way. And in my shelters, I try to reduce many of those. Unfortunately, breakfast bars and granola bars have almonds or some other thing. I just don't use them. I use oats and honey or various other things. Obviously, when it comes to other types of allergies, such as what do you call it, gluten allergies and things like that, certainly there are things you can get around to help that out. But when it comes to peanut allergies, it's just best not to have it, because just being in the area with peanuts can be problematic for people who have severe allergies.
And we want to be sure that that allergy is noted in SKYA when the clients check in as well.
Thank you. And another question is, do we enter the allergies information or dietary restrictions into SKYA when they register?
Yes, we do.
And for cleaning purposes, can you use Clorox wipes?
Not for cleaning, but for post sanitizing, you can. That's a bleach. It's a bleach derivative, right? The Clorox. So that would be for sanitizing, not for cleaning. You'd use soap and water for cleaning.
And for bacon, is it recommended that we do not put the bacon out? And that, thinking that it may be offensive to some clients.
That's an interesting question. I've never had that one.
No, it can be if other people are eating, if it happens to be on the menu, it happens to be on the menu. People who are adverse to that or it's not part of their religion don't need to take it. Dave, you have your Dave Fromer, you have your hand up. You want to go come off mute?
I have waiting for Dave. I have a brief comment. Once had. Go ahead, Dave.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say we have a lot of Clorox wipes and similar things in stock, but they cannot be used to disinfect a porous surface. It can only be used on a hard surface, and per the label instructions, same thing with bleach. You have to have a clear water rinse after you apply it, and it has a fixed time that it must remain wet on the surface. So it's not exactly the most effective disinfectant when you have a high temperature environment. So just bear that in mind. And peanuts, as you mentioned, I think California adopted a statute now. You can't have peanuts in schools. I could be wrong on that. I know a lot of schools do not allow them.
So before we go to the next question, I want to share my screen. The one source job tool that I searched was norovirus. So it tells you what you can use and what you cannot use. And you're able to use Clorox Healthcare hydrogen peroxide cleaner. And those can be used everywhere, including eating areas. And if you have additional questions on bleach, etc., you can go ahead and refer to that document. Okay, Michael, earlier you said you want to make a comment?
That's okay. It was clarified.
Okay, thank you so much. With that, we'll conclude today's session. Next week, we're going to talk about different feeding levels, feeding whether it's service associates, whether it's supervisors or headquarters that a day in their life, and to answer all the questions that we have. We'll see everyone next week, same time, same link, and please be mindful of the time zones and daylight savings. Thank you all so much. Thank you. See you next week.